the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, a voice from the past and big savings on Dave Butler ebooks. Plus, we continue our ongoing audiobook serialization of Timothy Zahn's Cobra, all right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. It's a pleasure to have you along. I am Baen Associate Editor and your podcast host, David Afsharirad. Well, DJ Butler is undoubtedly familiar to those of you who have listened to the podcast recently. And today we're celebrating the re-release of his Baen Books debut novel, Witchy Eye, which is being released as a trade paperback. Witchy Eye is book one in Dave's Witchy War series, a flintlock fantasy set in a magical Jacksonian America. The series now includes 4 novels, Witchy Eye, Witchy Winter, Witchy Kingdom, and Serpent Daughter, with 2 more in the works. For those who want to revisit the series, or for new readers, we're replaying Tony Daniel's interview with Dave about the book. But first, the news. This month marks the release of not 1, but 2 DJ Butler books. As we said, we are bringing Witchy Eye back into print as a trade paperback, and also March marks the release of Butler's latest novel, Time Trials, which was co-written by M.A. Rothman. To celebrate, we're offering discounts on all of the Witchy War series, as well as other books in Butler's backlists. For the month of March, get $1 off the Witchy War series, the Cunning Man series, which Butler wrote with Aaron Michael Ritchie, and the Indrajit and Fix series, as well as the standalone novel Abbott in Darkness. Now, these discounts are good wherever Baen ebooks are sold, and they will be valid through the end of the month. And that's it for the news.
I want to welcome DJ Butler to the podcast. Hello, Dave.
Hey, Tony.
DJ Butler, Dave Butler, grew up in swamps, deserts, and mountains. After messing around for years with the practice of law, he finally got serious and turned to his lifelong passion of storytelling. He now writes adventure stories for readers of all ages, plays guitar, and spends as much time as he can with his family. He's the author of City of the Saints, Rock Band Fights Evil, Space Eldritch, which is very hard to say, and Gretcheling, all from Wordfire Press, and now from Baen Books and at booksellers everywhere, new historical fantasy novel, Witchy Eye. So Dave, Witchy Eye is not exactly a debut since you've written a few books for Wordfire, but it is a pretty stunning piece of work from a newer novelist, I must say. It's getting some rave reviews too. Publishers Weekly gave it a starred review, and Larry Correa gave you a great author's review, which we've quoted on the Dust Jacket, by the way, of course. He called it impressive creativity and depth. Well, I guess he was talking about the book and you. You have a wonderfully evocative and lyrical prose style, I've found, which is what I suspect set off the fireworks at PW. Tell us a little bit about how you came to writing fiction. So what's the DJ Butler creation myth?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think so. I always wanted to be a writer, and the short synopsis is I chickened out for a long time. When I was a kid, my dad was an economics professor, and he traveled to conferences. And when he had to be gone, he'd bring back a gift, and he brought back. Starting when I was about 7 years old, he brought back books, and the first thing he brought was a box set of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And these were the 25th anniversary Silver Jubilee edition Valentine paperbacks. They had those Darrell K. Sweet covers, and I crawled into my top bunk and didn't come out of it until I'd read the whole set. And I wanted to be a writer, and I remember I had a journal, and I, instead of writing what happened in my day in the journal, I'd write bits of things that I thought writers were supposed to write, starting with the back cover copy, which is I assumed how you would do it. So
Yeah.
I remember writing descriptions of a book, or one 2-word teaser, 1 or 2 sentence teaser paragraphs that were supposed to entice the reader into this book I hadn't yet written. So I was an avid reader, especially fantasy. For a long time, I was trying to find Tolkien again. I think probably that's not true just me, but a lot of people, writers as well as readers, trying to capture the magic of reading Lord of the Rings for the first time. And you never quite find it again, but you find a lot of other wonderful stuff on the way. And I thought I would be a writer until I got into college and was starting to face kind of reality and the question of what I was going to do with my life, and didn't really have a clear view of how I'd make money as a writer. So I went to law school, and so I spent 13 years practicing law, and always kept my hand in writing stuff in shorter form. So not short stories, but I wrote a lot of songs, which, by the way, I think shows up in Witchy Eye. There are half a dozen original songs in the book, along with other kind of musical content.
And there's some cool lyrics, just like Tolkien.
Yeah, well, Tolkien remains a huge influence. Now, I'm going to do something Tolkien never did, which is, not I'm going to do, I'm currently doing. I am recording Witchy Eye, the album. I have a home studio, and those songs are not just lyrics; they're fully realized compositions with melody and chord structure. And so, sometime later this year, I already got the cover artist Dan Dos Santos' permission. I'll release a CD on Amazon.
Oh, very cool. We will definitely play some of those cuts here on the podcast if you want us to as well.
Oh, I would love to. I will send you CDs. But that's all I did for a lot of time, a lot of years. And then in 2010, a wonderful thing happened, which was I got fired. And I got fired in the best possible way. I got fired and given money. And because my company had been taken over, and so I had this opportunity to do whatever I wanted for a short period of time, and so I started writing, and my wife was very generous. I'm not sure she was a believer at first. I think she thought I would write a little bit and then go back to getting some lawyer job. But actually, I wrote prolifically, and right out of the gate, I got an agent, had him for a year, lost the agent, started self-publishing. My wife got excited and started writing, and ultimately picked up an agent, and she's got a book coming out from a Random House imprint next year too. So it's become our small family business.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah, and then picked up an agent again, moved with my self-published into Wordfire Press, which you mentioned, which is an up-and-coming mid-sized independent publisher. And they've got a couple hundred titles. Owned by Kevin Anderson out in Colorado. And then I picked up an agent, and then in February of last year, Tony Weisskopf made an offer on Witchy Eye, which is very exciting. I like all the things I've written, and you got to be careful, right? It's like your kids. You don't want to tell your kids which one is the favorite. That's never a good idea. But in some real ways, Witchy Eye is sort of the song of my heart. It really is the thing that I wrote that is in some ways pretty distinctively me, pretty different. And I am very, very excited to see it finally coming into print.
Yeah, well, let's Witchy Eye. It's really accomplished full novel. Definitely part of a tradition as well. I don't know if this is also part of your tradition as well as Tolkien. I'm talking about folk magic from America, whether it's British or Celtic or Scandinavian, but a lot of times Scot-Irish, and basing sort of a magical America either in the past or present on it. I think about Manly Wade Wellman's Silver John stories, which I love, and David Drake's tribute to Wellman, such as Old Nathan, or Orson Scott Card with his Alvin the Maker books, and there's just, I mean, there's a lot of others. Are any of these influences on you? Tell us more about the inspiration for Witchy Eye in particular, as you've alluded to here, if you would.
Yeah. So those are both bullseyes, actually. And let me give you some more. So I love the Silver John the Balladeer story. Those are fantastic. And I'm not sure when I read the first ones, but it was, that is absolutely part of my palette, and part of the background of Witchy Eye. I love Alvin the Maker's. The Alvin the Maker stories, they're a little more kind of small fantasy, but in terms of their setting, they're probably the closest thing out there to Witchy Eye. Witchy Eye is more epic, and there are some other differences we can talk about. But so in terms of other stuff, though, let me throw in a few more things in there. So I about 2011. When I was getting ready to write my next project, I was looking at a few books at the same time. So I was reading to my kids the Brothers Grimm fairy tales. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I can't remember which one, but I was reading a history of the 30 Years' War and kind of early modern Germany. And it's sort of silly to make this realization this late, but I sort of connected those two pieces and said, this isn't the Brothers Grimm setting, the settings in which you have both princesses and also lords mayor, right, aldermen and town council, but also an emperor. Like that's early modern Germany, and I sort of made that click, and I thought, I'd really love to write something in this setting. So much fantasy tends to be medieval or now urban. I'd like to write something in kind of pre-modern Germany. Now, at about that time, I started reading a piece of history, a classic work called Albion's Seed by David Hackett Fisher.
Oh, sure.
And yeah, so for listeners who may not recognize that is about the early English migrations, plural migrations, into North America. Because the basic point is this: we think about English migration to America as being a single stream, but actually there are multiple streams, and they come from discrete, distinct places and times in the UK to discrete, distinct places and times in America, and you can see the persistent influence of these migrations. So he talks about four, and I think the order he treats them as the first one is the Puritans, the Yankees, the Roundheads who are a persecuted religious minority in England, and so they flee mostly from the southeast of England, from Essex and Kent, to Massachusetts Bay, and they bring with them a distinctive set of dress and architectural customs and ways of eating and ideas about liberty and how and why do we marry and what is our religious practice and all this stuff. They are a culture. They're not just English. They're a distinctive culture. Well, then you get the Civil War. Puritan Cromwell rises to power. Puritans are suddenly welcome in England. So some of them go back, but who comes out from southwest England, from Alfred's old kingdom of Wessex, right, are royalists who have now lost. And the Massachusetts Bay is full of Roundheads, so they come to the Chesapeake. And so you get this Cavalier migration who eat and dress and worship and think differently. And then you've got you get a Quaker migration that comes from kind of central North England and has strong Scandinavian roots, the old Danelaw populations, and they come into the up the Delaware River and into sort of Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. And then finally the Appalachians, right? And he uses the term North British borderers, although sometimes Scots-Irish is a common term, but people who are a border people who live on the border of England and Scotland, where for some crazy length of time, like 600 years, every single king but one on both sides of the border invaded across their land, right? So they're a population whose culture is shaped by that dominant fact, and they come and they find America basically occupied. Well, everyone found America basically occupied, but I mean occupied by the Europeans. And so they keep going, and they walk past the planters and the Yankees, and they end up hitting the Appalachian Mountains and settling there. So sorry, that's a lot of background. But the point is, I read this book and I thought, this is the piece that is missing. What I want to do is tell a story in a setting that is America, but it's America as the Holy Roman Empire. It's America where we can still see these discrete cultures, where we can treat these different cultures like we would treat a fantasy race in an epic fantasy novel. We can explore them and learn about their different names, their different worldviews, and their habits, and their old hatreds and their obsessions, and an America that is organized with empire, an America where you can have on the one hand aldermen and mayors and burghers, and on the other hand dukes and landgraves, and so on. So there are other influences, I'm sure. Just to call one last one out, because I'm rereading this book, and so I need to mention it. So Susanna Clarke's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is a standalone novel. I think she's working on a sequel. The first one took 10 years, so we'll see when the sequel comes out. It is a wonderful book about the return of magic to England. It is set in the Regency, kind of Napoleonic period, around 1800 to 1815-ish, and it is very English, and it is tied up in English ideas about fairies, and asks questions like, what is England and what is an Englishman, as well as what is English magic like. And so another piece of sort of the thinking or the effort as I was writing Witchy Eye was to say, well, what would an American counterpart look like? What would a book look like that asks questions like, what does it mean to be American? What is American magic? What is America? So I don't want to be theme heavy in writing, but that's a piece that was in my heart that I was writing the story.
Yeah, we get a lot of this in the book, but it's a rousing adventure story at heart with just this background that seeps through. Well, let's talk about the story. Our heroine is Sarah Calhoun. At least that's the way we first know her. She's a very precocious 15-year-old, and the book is in, among other things, a coming-of-age story of Sarah. And she's got an odd deformity. Can you tell us about Sarah and about the world where she grew up? This little area where she grew up in particular.
Yeah. So Nashville. This is an epic fantasy novel that starts in Nashville. Sarah is a witch. She is a talented hexer. So by the recitation of nursery rhymes together with the judicious use of, egg yolks and blood and spit and stuff like this, she can accomplish charm. She's good at it. She is bright. She is funny. She's brave. She's fiercely loyal. She's also proud, paranoid, xenophobic, and just a little bit mean. And she's grown up as the youngest daughter, she believes, of Iron Andy Calhoun, who is a military hero. He's a veteran of the Ohio Forks War and the Pontiac Uprising, and he is one of 13 people in Appalachie entitled to cast a vote for emperor and other key decisions under the 1784 Philadelphia Compact, organized by the Lightning Bishop Benjamin Franklin. So he is, like I was saying, this is an America that looks like the Holy Roman Empire, in some ways. Appalachee is organized around 13 great families, collectively sometimes called the Ascendancy, and so the Calhoun family sends one elector anytime there is an assembly of electors, and Iron Andy is that guy. Now, as his youngest daughter, Sarah has received an extraordinary upbringing. So there are traditional ideas, or there's a traditional idea about how women and men are to be educated in this culture, and a woman's upbringing and a man's upbringing are different things. And what Sarah gets is, in fact, neither. What she gets is one-on-one tutoring by the elector that includes exotic things like Latin, as well as geography and politics. Because Andy is the only one who in the clan knows the truth of her origin, which is she is not his daughter. He is fostering her and hiding her. And so we meet Sarah, and so Sarah's deformity, she has an eye that's never opened, and it is swollen and bulging. And this is the first thing we see about her from another character's point of view in the first paragraph, really. And it oozes pus, and she is self-conscious about it and a little bit bitter. This is sort of part of her meanness as a defense mechanism. And she has this bad eye. And on the day of the tobacco fair in Nashville, Sarah has come down to sell the electors tobacco. She and her cousins, the Calhoun youngins, have come to sell tobacco, and she is the victim of a kidnap attempt by a Yankee Army chaplain and wizard, and that's how the story goes, or starts.
Yeah. So, I mean, my guess was that we were somewhere around 1800 in the novel, if you wanted to have some parallel to our world. We have some people who did great deeds in the 1750s and 60s who are the old folks now, at least. We're in North America. It's very different. Maybe there's a great map that's on the back of the dust jacket by Rhys Davis. I think it's a beautiful map that gives you a really good idea of all this. And along with the wonderful Dan Dos Santos cover. Are you happy with that? I hope so.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
They don't get much better than that.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. So Sarah may be the scion of an important family. It's hard to talk about the story without the revelation that she is. So this monk shows up, Thalanes, I believe you call him. I don't know if that's the way to say it. He's come to Nashville looking for her. Tell us about him. He's a very interesting character.
Yeah, so he is. A lot of the action that's in this book is driven by a former generation. So Sarah is, and you're right. I want to minimize the spoilers. There will be some. So it turns out Sarah is not the daughter of Iron Andy Calhoun. You learn this early in the story. She is instead the daughter of the dead former empress, Mad Hannah Penn. So the imperial throne is elective, but it has been in the Penn family for the 2 or 3 generations since the compact. The year is 1815. So it's about 30 years that the compact's been in force. As they were generally influential leaders, as essentially the wealthiest people and the biggest landowner for a century and a half before the compact. And so Sarah is from on one side is from this family. Her mother, Hannah Penn, famously was immured, locked away by her brother 15 years ago. It turns out that's about the time of Sarah's birth. And has been known as Mad Hannah Penn, and as the story opens, Mad Hannah has just died. On her father's side, Sarah is the daughter of the imperial consort, not the emperor, but king of one of the 7 Moundbuilder kingdoms of the Ohio, Cahokia, the largest and sort of in their religion and magic, sort of the central of the 7 Moundbuilder kingdoms. And he died mysteriously. So what's happened is that the Empress's death is not accidental. She has been murdered finally at the end of a long period of imprisonment by her brother, the living Emperor Thomas. And Thomas Penn has learned of Sarah's existence for the first time and where she is, and wants her killed. And that's one of the basic drivers in the story. Now, Thalanes is a monk. He is a member of he is one of what they call the Firstborn. As I said earlier, the book is in a way about America. The name America does not appear in it. The name America doesn't really belong in the book. Similarly, the word human doesn't appear. Word human being. There are 2 different groups we would think of as human beings. They are all the children of Adam. They all have a biblical narrative as part of their origin story. But only some of them, only humans like you and I, think of ourselves, are the children of Eve. The others are sometimes called the children of wisdom, or the firstborn, or Ophidians, and there are stories about them, positive and negative, to tell where they came from. But some other woman, not Eve. So these are the people. These are the people whose kingdoms fill the Ohio, the 7 Moundbuilder kingdoms, and they're distinctive. They look human in many ways. They are magically more gifted than the children of Eve. They are allergic to silver, and Thalanes is one of them. He is a monk. He's a priest, and he was both the companion of Sarah's father when he was a sort of military hero and king, riding the borders of his land, and then after his lord's death, he was the father confessor, the priest to Hannah in her imprisonment, and he's driven by a couple things. One, his order has an extremely libertarian spirituality. He's all about persuasion and no coercion. Persuasion and no coercion. And their origin, their patron saint, is the firstborn named Setes, who was the mayor of Wittenberg and who opposed Martin Luther, but would not oppose him forcibly at all, and died as a martyr. So there's that element in Thalanes, and the other piece is driving him is guilt, because he let Hannah herself know where Sarah was, and therefore when Thomas discovered there were children and tortured his sister Hannah to death, Hannah was able to give away the location of Sarah, and so Thalanes is driven by guilt.
So he's being
but he's monk and it was.
Yeah, so Thomas Penn is chasing these. We maybe haven't. I don't know if so. Hannah had triplets, and one of those triplets is Sarah.
One of those triplets is Sarah,
and these triplets are the heirs because they are by Thomas's brother, who was murdered, right?
Yeah. So
met an untimely end somehow.
So they are. It's not Thomas's brother; it's his sister Hannah. They are the children of Hannah. They're the children of Hannah Penn, and therefore they are the heirs to the Penn landholding fortune. Now, nobody is the heir to being emperor. That's an elective position, but the Penn landholder has been elected as emperor. So they are a threat to him as the landowner. They are a threat to him then as someone who could be elected in his stead as emperor. And on Ohio kingdoms.
Okay, I had that backwards. So Hannah is the sister of the pen, and their father is the firstborn.
Yep,
Okay.
that's exactly right.
All right. And Sarah is half firstborn, and the firstborn are rather like elves in some way, I would say, correct? Correct me if I'm wrong, Dave.
That is right. Pallid, dark-haired, magically gifted, slightly not human.
Mm-hmm. So, well, this sets up sort of well, this sets up the bad guy, or one of the several bad guys who are after Sarah, and explain a bit about the bad guys. Angleton, the Reverend Angleton, is a piece of work, isn't he? He's quite willing to torture and maim if he's doing the Lord's work.
Yep. Yep, that's right. I don't use the word Puritan. One of the sort of features of the story is that there has been no Reformation. Martin Luther was not about Reformation. His political controversies actually relate to the firstborn and to political power. So there's been no Reformation, and in fact, and this is not explicit in Witchy Eye, but it is in one of the sequels, the papacy, in fact, has fallen out of existence because the Borgia Pope turned Turk to save his life, converted to Islam, and the papacy ended. So you've got a sort of conciliar model of Christianity. So he's not a Puritan, but he is a parson. He is a preacher. He is an army chaplain, and he's been Thomas's companion, the Emperor Thomas's companion from their school days. And he is haunted. He is absolutely driven. Well, he's got two big drivers. One of them is loyalty to Thomas, who, when his Ezekiel Angleton's fiancée died in a carriage accident young, Thomas saved Ezekiel from ruin. Forced Harvard to give him another shot, and ultimately placed him in the Martinite order where he is. So he's very loyal to Thomas. He's also really driven by a fear of an obsession with death, again dating to the death of Lucy, his betrothed. And he sees the world very black and white. And he is absolutely willing to kidnap and commit acts of violence if he believes that he is doing it for the right reasons. Now, one of the things that starts to happen to him over the book is he starts to be forced into situations that make him uncomfortable and question or he's forced to do things that he would have seen as black, including become aligned with one of the other bad guys that we haven't really mentioned yet, or only in passing. So one of the villains of the piece is the necromancer Oliver Cromwell, and I love Tony. I love playing with history.
Well, Cromwell would seem to be a very long-lived Oliver Cromwell, then, I guess, because he's a necromancer.
Yeah. So in real history, a fierce wind blew the day Cromwell died, called the Death Wind, and in this world, Cromwell, in fact, transcended death. And Cromwell, we get some insight into Cromwell's views later, but Cromwell sees himself as not as the villain, not as the necromancer. He sees himself as the hero. His plan is to liberate the children of Eve from death, and so he is manipulating. He is manipulating Thomas. He is manipulating Ezekiel Angleton. He sends undead and other kinds of magical servants after Sarah, and it's one of the movers in the story.
I was going to ask you about our wraiths and nasties a little later. But tell us about some of them, like the mockers and the Lazars. Oh, scary.
Yeah. So the mockers are. So this is part of Cromwell's sorcery. Cromwell in his taking over of England in his lifetime, before he's defeated by John Churchill and driven out of England. Part of his forces are not human. They're sort of in the nature of mechanical things. And this is a play again on real history. Cromwell called his Puritan army the New Model Army. Well, in Witchy Eye, some of those are genuinely models, including mockers who are beings made out of clay that change shape. The Lazars are an undead. They're not a species. They're undead individuals who have made a pact to continue to live, and the sort of leaders of this band of Lazars who come after Sarah later in the book include Robert Hooke, who was Cromwell's sorcerer sidekick, and Black Tom Fairfax. And these guys are pale, fingernails and toenails that never stop growing, and rotting black eyes that drop worms out of them. So they're pretty gross. They're pretty gross.
And let's talk about a few of the other characters as well, because there's some wonderful characters in the book. There's Calvin Calhoun, who's protective brother cousin to Sarah. He is pretty handy to have around, especially when the mocker or two tries to attack. He's sort of a Lancelot sort of guy, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, he is. He genuinely wants to do good, and so Cal is a cattle rustler by trade, and he's also uses the term New Light. He's a Christian. He's a New Light Christian, sort of light on the saints and heavy on kind of practical, being a good person, sort of spirituality. And Cal is genuinely a good guy. Now Calvin, so he can rope, he can start a fire, he can track, he can hunt. He's sort of the commercially savvy person among his cousins. So on the first day in the tobacco fair, when the story starts, he's the one who's negotiating with the Dutch and the Igbo and the Castilian traders. And Cal's got a couple things going on. One of them is that he's always been in love with Sarah, who he thought was his cousin, and he felt conflicted about that. And so for him, the news that she is not his cousin is a wonderful release. And he tries a couple times to sort of press his suit and can't for various reasons. And so he's this guy who is in love and is taking care of. Will do his best to protect Sarah and take her where she needs to go, because he loves her and because that's the right thing to do, even though it is essentially all self-sacrificing. But yeah, there are a few. It's his fantasy, so you can write a few unabashedly good people into these stories, and he is one of them. He's not perfect, but he is unironic and wants to do good. And is in love.
Yeah, he's fun, and we can always feel that he's watching over Sarah. There's Bad Bill, another character, Sir William Johnston Lee, who's sort of he's a bit of comic relief, even though it's kind of a dark comic relief, and he's sort of a tragic comic figure in general, isn't he?
Yeah. So Bill is a cavalier with a capital C, meaning he's part of that aristocracy of the Chesapeake, and he's a military man, and he fought against New Spain with Sarah's father, and in fact was the head of his bodyguard Imperial Lighthouse Dragoons called the Philadelphia Blues. And so Bill is a gunman and sort of an aristocrat, and he has some definite weaknesses, including foreign language, and he's a little bit of a bigot, not in a mean-hearted way, but foreigners are always definitely foreign, and he's completely incompetent with money and some of those practical details.
Yeah, he has trouble figuring out exactly what that stuff called interest is and it keeps biting him.
He's baffled by interest, which is a bad thing to be baffled by when you are in debt to money lenders. And that's where we see Bill at the beginning. Is he's fallen. He's fallen really hard because he was once a knight in his view. He rode to war and he rode on adventures and he dealt out justice with Sarah's father, the Lion of Missouri. That's what her father was called. And Bill was Sir William was part of that band, and now he's not. Now he is an alcoholic, and he's basically a thug for hire, living in New Orleans. And we see him on a day when he has planned to commit a murder, basically, and it is for hire because he'll get paid, and that will get him out of his debt. With the bishop's son of the Bishop of New Orleans, who is his money lender, and let him pay off his landlady. And Bill gets involved in the story because his connection with Thalanes and with Sarah's father and mother, he knows where one of the other triplets is hidden. So once the action gets started in Nashville, their first objective becomes, Thalanes know where William Lee is or where he was. Let's go find him, and we can go connect with your brother and sister. So Bill's a great fighter. He's great at seizing the initiative and doing the thing that needs to be done and shooting to kill. But he's fun to write because he often misses the nuance of people and culture and language around him.
He is a fun character, but he's also the purpose of the quest that Thalanes and Sarah and Cal are on. And this is a coming-of-age novel for Sarah, and like I said, even though there's a lot of, just fighting and good adventure as well, but there's even a Huck Finn-like trip down the Mississippi, and Sarah's encounter with the Mississippi kind of marks her transformation from simple country girl in a way to what she's going to become. I guess tell us a little bit about this journey that Sarah's taking on the inside and the outside.
Yeah. So Sarah's journey is going to take her into places she does not expect. One of the other major actors in the book is a god. Is in fact the god of the Ohio and the Mississippi rivers, and it's a god who has an ecology that is sort of reminiscent of sort of your Horus, Osiris, or Dyad, or something out of India. The god exists in alternating manifestations, and there has been, and I'm going to tread a little carefully here because it's given so many spoilers. But the thing is, there's a lot in the book, so there's so much still you haven't read.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to ask you about the Beast Men and the Heron King and such. So let's talk about that. It's just cool. It's super cool. We need to mention it. So.
Yes. So he's a god, and he exists for long periods in this peaceful manifestation, and then he has a son, and his son has a short and terrible reign of violence, judgment, and destruction. At the same time, driven to reproduce again, so that his son can return as the peaceful manifestation. So it's one God, but it exists in alternating kind of father-son. and people in the Ohio are somewhat aware of this. A real understanding of it turns out to be part of the royal lore that is passed down by the kings and queens of Cahokia, who are tied to that god and its ecology. So Sarah's journey is going to be so one of the things kicking off the action in the story is that we've had the transition, and this manifests itself as strange messengers out of the Mississippi saying Peter Plowshare is dead, which people mostly don't have any idea what he's talking about. What they're talking about, well, what it means is the peaceful manifestation is over, and great destruction is coming. So Sarah's path will ultimately intertwine inextricably with that god who mostly rules the Mississippi River and the Ohio. The Missouri is this sort of magical, fecund, but also mutating wilderness, which it and the great green wood around it generate, still have American megafauna, although we don't see them. They're obliquely referred to a bit in Book 1. We'll see them in Book 2 a little. But also generate the beast kind, who are part human, part animal, but not in a predictable way. And no two beast kind look alike. The two that we see most closely in Book 1, one of them has a turtle's head. One of them is basically a turtle walking on its hind legs. The other is a beautiful woman who has the bill of a duck on the front of her face. So so the Heron King. The Heron King is this god, and his built-in drive to destroy everything and then procreate against his will, because he doesn't actually want to be replaced by his peaceful son/self, is also one of the movers in the story.
Yeah, and I mean, and the question of the story is, how's Sarah going to deal with all this? And she's finding out that she's being chased by horrors, and she's the possessor of amazing magical talents if only she can harness them, and it's just great stuff, great epic fantasy stuff. So what are you working on at the moment, Dave? Will we see more novels set in? I mean, I hope we see more set in the Witchy Eye universe, because this is, although it's a clear, complete novel in itself, with some real resolution, it's also obviously there can be more going on afterwards.
Yeah, this is I'm writing Book 2. As of now, I've got a little more than half of Book 2 written, and Book 2 follows Sarah into the Ohio. We see the Firstborn more. We learn more about this kind of magical / sacred ecology of the gods that she is tied to. At the same time, we see more of we see the other siblings, one of whom has been kept hidden by a Catalan pirate in the Gulf, and the other one is living as sort of a despised orphan figure in the home of an insane, the Earl of Johnsland, who is North Carolina, actually, who's mad, and mad for reasons that tie back to some of Bill's actions and the earlier history of some of the other characters. We also get to see more of the cultures that compose this non-America America. More of the Ohio Germans. We get to spend some time with an Algonquin character that I'm that I like quite a bit. So that's very exciting. That's next. I would like, and by the way, there is a prequel story up on Baen's website right now, and that's a prequel short story.
Yeah, it's the way you get to it is at the moment it's on the Baen.com front page, and it links from there. After it goes down, it will be in the free ebook download. You can get at Baen eBooks. Free Short Stories 2017, and that will be up perpetually. You'll always be able to get that. It's De Britannici. Is that how you say it, or is it? That's the title.
De Britannici. De Britannici. British Gods.
Aha.
Yeah. And that's another historical joke. So look, these I'm like Bob Dylan. Like, not to flatter myself, but to understand Bob Dylan, you have to realize he's joking all the time. And I'm also telling sort of little historical and cultural jokes repeatedly, and they're buried. I'll point out a couple. So De Britannici is a prequel story. It is about John Churchill. John Churchill, in real life, was one of the great antagonists of Louis XIV, the Sun King. He led the united forces of England and the Netherlands and other non-France powers, and basically prevented France from entirely taking over Europe. He was, I think, essentially undefeated in the field for a decade. This caused him to be made the Duke of Marlborough, and he built the Blenheim Palace. He is the ancestor of Winston Churchill. In the Witchy Eye universe, he is not the great antagonist of Louis XIV, but the great antagonist of Oliver Cromwell. He is the guy who rebels against Cromwell's eternal republic and saves England with a question mark, because part of this short story is about one of the hard choices he makes to prevent England from being destroyed, to save his forces from one of the necromancer spells, and it involves rejecting Christianity. Just one of the little jokes. I'll give away one of my own little jokes. Okay, in real life, John Churchill's father, Winston Churchill, the first Winston Churchill, wrote a book. He was a Cavalier, and so he was during the Civil War in England. He was out of favor, and then King Charles II came back, and like lots of other Cavaliers who had been out of favor, he did things to try to impress Charles II and get in favor at court. He wrote a book, and the book was a book of heraldry, and the book was called Divi Britannici. That was in real life the name of the book written by John Churchill's father, which means something like august British men, something like that. Okay, so in the Witchy Eye universe, instead he wrote a book called De Britannici, which is British Gods, and this volume is in the story and is part of the inspiration for his son John making then the decision to return to the fold of Woden and Wayland Smith and Herne the Hunter to stop the necromancer. So I love that story. I'm thrilled it's up on Baen website, and I would love to write more of that period, including others. So I'm hopeful. We'll see how the launch goes, but I would love to write many stories in this setting. Yeah.
It's a really, really cool story. And even though you have to maybe go out in the weeds a little bit to get the pun there, the play on words, but it's really cool. What's so great about Witchy Eye and the story is the ability to read them on just a fun adventure level, and then to just get into the background when you feel like it, and the richness of the world. It's just it's impressive on a lot of levels, and just very fun and very entertaining. The book is Witchy Eye by DJ Butler, which is at booksellers everywhere now. You can get it, folks. Dave, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Tony. I had a great time. I appreciate you inviting me.
And now we bring you Timothy Zahn's Cobra. Earth's only hope was the Cobras. The colony worlds Adirondack and Silvern fell to the Troft forces almost without a struggle. Outnumbered and on the defensive, Earth made a desperate decision. It would attack the aliens not from space, but on the ground, with forces the troughs did not even suspect. Thus were created the Cobras, a guerrilla force whose weapons were surgically implanted, invisible to the unsuspecting eye, yet undeniably deadly. But power brings temptation, and not all the Cobras could be trusted to fight for Earth alone. Johnny Moreau would learn the uses and abuses of his special abilities and what it truly meant to be a Cobra.
It was quickly clear that whether he'd intended such a result or not, Zhu had given Johnny the best opening he could possibly have come up with. The other syndics listened closely, even raptly, as Johnny described in detail the Cobra's battle with the Gantua the previous afternoon. He hadn't had that kind of attention in weeks, and if it emphasized how much Aventine needed Cobra power, it surely also reminded them that Cobra goodwill and cooperation were equally vital. It was, he decided, a fair psychological trade-off. The important question, of course, he said when he'd finished, is what could cause a Gantua to behave like that? As of late yesterday evening, we have the answer. He paused, flicking a glance at Darl. The comité was as attentive as the others, but if he saw his scheme unraveling, his expression gave no hint of it. It appears, Johnny continued, that the Gantua was deliberately drugged with a hallucinogenic chemical sprayed directly on its food supply. He paused again, but the dramatic outburst he'd half expected never materialized. That's ridiculous, Jor Hemner spoke up into the silence. Why would anyone do something like that? Johnny took a deep breath. This was it. Perhaps, he said, locking eyes with Darl, to persuade us to accept a Cobra presence we don't really need. Darl returned his gaze steadily. Are you accusing me of drugging your Gantuas, Syndic? And have you got any proof? Zhu added tartly before Johnny could answer. Because you damn well better not be even suggesting Comité Darl has any connection with this unless you do. The proof is on his ship, Johnny wanted to say. But until and unless Jamie contacted him, he didn't dare invite any scrutiny in that direction. I'm not accusing anyone specifically, gentlemen, he said, shifting his attention between Zhu and Darl. But since it seems obvious a crime has been committed, and since it's unarguable that the drugged Gantua's existence had at least an indirect effect on yesterday's vote, I would like to suggest the vote be rescinded and the new vote not be taken until all the facts are in on this case. What other facts do you expect to find? An older syndic put in. Or should I say hope to find? It seems to me you've got nothing but a soap bubble of... Gentlemen. Darl's voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it that cut off the syndic in mid-sentence. If I may make a suggestion, it seems to me you're putting too much emphasis on guarding my honor and too little on solving the genuine mystery Syndic Moreau's uncovered. If there is indeed clandestine activity underway, it must be stopped, no matter who is involved. If, on the other hand, what we have here is a purely natural phenomenon, you should similarly learn all that you can about it, and as quickly as possible. Natural phenomenon? Johnny snorted. If the comité will excuse my skepticism. Skepticism is a natural part of science, Darl interrupted him calmly. But before you announce your disbelief too loudly, I suggest you check on the following. 1. Are all the blassa plants in the Cascia Valley coated by this drug? 2. Is there any trace of it on the surrounding foliage? 3. Are there any conditions under which the plants could themselves naturally produce such a drug? And 4. Are such conditions currently present? The answers to these questions might prove interesting. He stood up and nodded to Zhu. With your permission, I will continue the equipment setup begun yesterday. If a later vote requires its removal, it can be done easily enough. Of course, Comité, Zhu agreed quickly. Thank you for coming today. Syndics, the meeting is adjourned. And that was it. In half a minute, Darl had completely blunted his attack, an attack the comité had been remarkably well prepared for. Tight-lipped, Johnny collected his mag cards and left the room. Halloran, still in Niparan, listened quietly as Johnny described the fiasco over the phone. He sounded awfully sure of himself, he commented thoughtfully. What chance that he's right about this thing being a natural phenomenon? Johnny exhaled loudly. It's hard to imagine him going that far out on a purely speculative limb, he admitted. But if that's what's happening, how come he knew about it and we didn't? Halloran shrugged. You've been sending samples and data back to Asgard for a long time, and they've got far better test and computer simulation equipment than you'll ever see here. Or maybe it was something even simpler. Maybe some of the live plants got dehydrated during the trip. Dehydrated? So you think it's the drought? I don't know what other condition he could be referring to. It's the only environmental factor that's new to you. Johnny gnawed the inside of his cheek. The drought. All right, then. If that's the problem, we'll just have to eliminate it. Halloran cocked an eyebrow. You know a rainmaker who specializes in getting clouds over mountains? Actually, I can do better than that. Hang on. He pressed the lock key on the phone and got a connection to Rankin. Chris answered, the screen splitting to include her image. Hi, hon, he greeted her. Is Gwen there? Hi, Johnny. Callie? Yes, she's in the kitchen. Gwen? A moment later, Gwen's face replaced Chris's. Hi, guys, what's up? Your vacation, Johnny told her. I've got a little job for you and Callie. Describing what he had in mind took only a few minutes, and it turned out to be the easy part. Johnny, that's crazy, Gwen told him flatly. Do you have any idea of what you're asking? Syndic Hemner will be furious if he catches them, Chris put in from off-camera. Why? Johnny countered. They're both supposed to be in his district, remember? But under his authority, not yours, Halloran said. So you leave your field phones off and plead ignorance. Johnny shrugged. What's he going to do? Bust me back to C5? Probably have you arrested and sent to the Palatine beachhead, Halloran said bluntly, especially if it doesn't work. But if it does work, he won't be able to do a thing without looking like a petty legalist, Johnny said. And I have confidence in you two. Well, I don't, Gwen admitted. Johnny, you can't do something like this on 10 minutes' notice. It takes time. Time for studies, time for mapping and emplacement. Maps we've got. The Mulata mountain range has been extensively studied. As to the rest, we can surely risk a little environmental damage. Johnny, there's still one major point you're missing. Chris moved back into camera range, and Johnny was struck by the odd intensity in her face. What you're doing, she continued softly, is planning to bypass legal channels, to take a major policy decision away from Zhu and the other syndics and handle it yourself. Don't you see? That's exactly what you and Ken fought to keep Challenor from doing 7 years ago. Johnny's mouth felt suddenly dry. No, it's different, Chris. He was trying to take over the whole planet, to totally eliminate the Dominion Authority. It's different only in degree. She shook her head minutely. You'll still be setting a precedent that a syndic, or a Cobra, who doesn't like a legal governmental decision can simply ignore it and go his own way. But it's not the same, the words echoed through Johnny's mind. The government's doing something stupid just because an important outsider wants them to. My responsibility is to the people of Aventine. To the people of Aventine. Challenor's old argument. The three faces crowded together in the phone screen were watching him closely. All right, he said with a sigh. Gwen, you and Callie will head out for the Caskia Valley, but to do feasibility studies only. I'll bring it up with the whole council before we take any real action, but I want to be able to at least show them a solid alternative. Chris seemed to sag as the tension left her. Thank you, she murmured. He smiled tightly. Don't thank me. You're the one who was right. He focused on Gwen. Chris will get you in touch with Theron Utu, my assistant, who'll find you an air car and pilot and whatever else you'll need. Check with Chris for anything electronic. If she can't find it, she can probably build it. You can rendezvous with Callie in Neparan and go from there. As for you, Callie, he held up a finger for emphasis. No matter what Theron or Gwen tell you, any equipment you take is replaceable. If you run into a crazed Gantua up there, don't hesitate to grab Gwen and run for it. Got it? Got it. Halloran hesitated. If it helps any, I think you're making the right decision. Not really, but thanks anyway. Chris? I'll call Theron right away. She nodded, all business now. We can probably have Gwen down to Neparan in 3 hours or less. Good. Well, keep me posted, everyone, and I'll let you know when you're needed here. And be careful. They all signed off, and for several minutes Johnny just sat there, feeling oddly alone in the quiet office. As if his own career and Jamie's weren't enough, he'd now put Gwen's and Callie's on the target range too. Could he really be that sure he was right about all this? There wasn't any answer for that. But at the moment, there was something he needed more than answers anyway. Flipping on the phone, he called Darl's ship. "Jamie Moreau," he told the young ensign who answered. "Tell him it's his brother." The other nodded and faded. A minute later, the screen lit up with Jamie's image. "Yes, Johnny," he said. His voice was casually friendly, but there was an edge of wariness to his expression. "I'd like to get together with you later," Johnny said. "Dinner tonight, maybe, whenever you get off duty?" The wariness deepened. "Well, no inquisitions, no favors, no politics," Johnny promised. "I'd just like to be with family for a while, if you've got the time." Jamie smiled faintly, the tension easing from his face. "There's always time for the important stuff," he said quietly. "Let's make it lunch, that same restaurant in half an hour." Johnny smiled back. Already the weight around his shoulders was lifting a little. "I'll be there."
That was another installment in Timothy Zahn's Cobra, and that's it for the podcast. Thanks as always to Audible.com and podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. Praise, thanks, and gratitude to Tony Daniel and Dave Butler for sitting down all those many years ago to discuss Witchy Eye. And good night, Tony Daniel, wherever you are. This is David F. Sharirod coming to you from a soundproof bunker somewhere deep in the heart of Texas. Join us here next week at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.